Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and for those of you that have been with me since the beginning of my podcasting journey, you may remember today's guest, Matty Lansdown. Matty's a bit of a unicorn. He's a scientist, nutritionist, podcast host, and health coach. He specializes in weight loss and self-confidence building for women. He started out in the field of nutritional epigenetics and then spent several years working in hospitals as part of a disease research team. Matty believes that more often than not, disease and illness are a result of poor nutrition, mindset, and lifestyle choices. Having been on his own personal development journey, Matty is now super passionate about showing women, especially busy moms, how to level up their health so that healthy habits and making the best food choices comes more naturally. Matty's weekly podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die, provides his followers with a deep dive into nutrition and ways to help develop healthy habits that actually last. Matty, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me on. I've loved the conversation we had that wasn't recorded, so...
I know, right? They didn't get to hear us catching up, but they might have been bored with us talking shop.
Let's make this one even better.
Thanks, no pressure. All right, but kidding aside, I want to kick off with a topic that I think is something you talk about often, and we all know now that sugar is something we should be limiting. Mm-hmm. To some extent, limiting, cutting out completely. I don't know, you can tell us, but I think that most of us have really struggled with feeling too restricted when we try to go down that path.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to really understand your thought around why it's so important to kind of minimize or get rid of it for our health, and what you've seen work when you're working with other people. And any tips you can give us on trying to take that journey, sort of maybe baby steps to get us there.
Yeah, it's a big conversation, the sugar conversation. And I think, there's debates in the space as to whether sugar's good or whether sugar's bad. And I think fundamentally sugar is fine. It's just another nutrient that's in our diet. And the problem is the frequency and the volume. And over time, the same products have increased the amount of sugar that they have in them because the palate of the Western world has progressively gotten further and further into the world of sugar. And I guess the reason is why, or the question is why. And I think the answer to that is that simply companies realize that sugar is an addictive substance and it's psychoactive. And depending on the study that you read, it's, varying degrees of more addictive than cocaine and illicit substances. It changes the state of the brain. Most people know if they go on a big sugar binge, there'll be a huge crash afterwards where they feel they can't focus. And I just bring that stuff up as evidence that it changes the state of the brain. And one of my clients gave me this term actually called dopamining. And we often go towards sugar because it tastes good, it's fun, it's pleasurable, and we're getting that dopamine experience. So dopamine is the happy hormone that's released in our body when we achieve something, or we, it can be doing it at the gym. It can be, going on a really nice date or having a positive interaction with somebody. But now we don't actually need to do anything to get dopamine. And so the way that we're wired pushes us in the direction of dopamining. And so we go mining for dopamine in chocolate and croissants and bread. I would argue bread these days is, refined sugar and carbohydrates as well. And so it's really easy to end up in this place of perpetually dopamine seeking behavior because we're actually wired as humans to seek dopamine. And so we've got this world where we've got this psychoactive brain altering substance that evolutionarily we were desired to seek because in nature, it wasn't accessible. Occasionally, we came across a piece of fruit that hadn't been attacked by insects, bees, monkeys, or anybody else or birds that got to it first, and we're like, oh my God. Or, we came across, a beehive with honey, and everybody ate as much as they could because that's all that they were going to have for months or even years in some instances. And so we never developed this mechanism in our body to manage our sugar cravings because sugar was never super abundant in nature. The second part of that is sugar in nature, fruit and honey, is not sugar in chocolate, which is highly refined, highly concentrated, and lacks fiber and all of the other supporting micronutrients. So I think we're evolutionarily wired to have challenges with sugar.
And so when people try to get off that train, that sugar train, going after that hit, they feel sort of a withdrawal. I mean, people really struggle to get away from it. Is it just a matter of moderation, just kind of slowly back off and, minimize and minimize and minimize until you're just doing the tiniest amount of it? Is that what you would suggest?
Well, I think it's personality dependent. And I think most things are easy when there's no alternative. Because once upon a time, people often ask me, I do emotional eating work and binge eating work. Like, Matty, was this a problem in the past and we just didn't really identify it? And mostly no. And the reason for that is there wasn't the option to emotionally eat. There wasn't the amount of food in the house to just binge eat all of it without the rest of the family being really angry that you've just eaten everybody's food for the week, And so in the presence of no other option, things are really easy. But when we know what we're missing out on, it's really difficult to self-manage. And some people are abstainers and some people are moderators. Moderator is the person that can have 2 pieces of chocolate of an entire block and put it back in the cupboard and kind of forget about it for a couple of days until they're in there and they're like, oh yeah, I've got some chocolate. And that is a very small percentage of people.
Yeah.
And I am jealous of those people. And then there's the people...
Because the majority eat the whole thing.
Yes, exactly. And then there's those people that absolutely need to abstain. And I think maybe some people need to build up to abstaining, and there can also be structural abstaining as well. And so that's what I have in my own personal life. And many of my clients go towards sort of a more structural abstinence. And what that means is that I give myself permission when I'm out of the house and having dinner with friends or having brunch or, I'm going on a date with my girlfriend. There's no structure. It's just enjoy whatever food we order, enjoy it. But once I arrive home, home's kind of like the temple, the sanctuary. And that's where, ideally, unless there's a gift or unless there's a particular event, sugar doesn't come into the house, which obviously can be a system that's also hacked because it's like, well, let's just go out every night,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that involves some self-awareness and self-regulation to be like, oh, am I going out too much to justify my sugar consumption? If I buy it at the supermarket and then eat it in the car, does that count as not at home? Right? And that's where we get into a bunch of psychology around like your inner parent and your inner child and, who's trying to manipulate who within your own brain.
Who's driving?
Exactly. So I think, it's figuring out, am I a moderator? Moderators virtually don't need any help because they're already moderating. And then people that need to abstain or build some type of abstinence into their life or safe spaces in their life where they're okay to actually manage that space in a way that's like, 99% of the time, sugar doesn't enter this space and that's totally fine.
I really like that. I hate to say the word rule, but it's kind of like setting up a rule or a parameter, which lets you know where those boundaries live. It's not saying good or bad, right? We don't want to label things good or bad, but it sets up the structure so you don't have to think about it. So it's just a given and you know what the rules of engagement are. I think that's so smart. Whenever you can take the decision out of it, right off the top, it makes it easier. Like you said, the safe space, so you can kind of have that built-in delineation.
Yep.
It's built-in moderation. I love, love, love that idea. You said the word alternative, so I want to bring in the topic of sugar alternatives. Lots of opinions on whether or not it's better to have, say, a Diet Coke or a regular Coke or whatever.
It's a great question.
Intercept with whatever you want to put in there. What do you think about the sugar alternatives? How bad? I'm going to use the word bad. How bad are they?
I think it's a great question. And I think it depends where you are on your journey. So fundamentally, I'm a biologist. I sort of started, in science and working in molecular biology. And so my default is always going to be what worked for thousands and thousands, depending on your belief system, thousands or millions of years, and what has changed in just the last 100. And so for me, what that means is that whole real food from the earth or from a farm, is what we need to prioritize. It's what got the human species to this point in time. And it's obviously worked because, we're able to create this fantastic, amazing world and get on a podcast and have this conversation. So the lineage before us, obviously, for the most part, ate pretty well, right? And so what did they eat? They ate things that came out of the earth. They hunted animals that roamed the earth. And so for me, that's the destination that we want to arrive at, which is most of our diet being, sort of 80 to 90% whole real food from Mother Nature. And so on that journey, you might start at, let's say, Coca-Cola. And step one might be Diet Coke, right? Diet Coca-Cola. And that's a fantastic first step. There's no doubt about it. But if we stay there, we're not really moving very far at all. We've made the first baby step, which is a great thing. But if we hang out there, we're not really progressing very far. As for the sugar alternatives, in some cases, sugar alternatives can actually spike your blood sugar and your insulin more than actual sugar. And in some instances, what can happen is it will tell the brain that sugar has come into the system because you've told your taste buds you've got this sweet signaling. And over thousands of years, we've learned that sweet signaling is sugar. And so what will happen is that your pancreas will release insulin to go looking for that sugar and not be able to find it. So what happens when we've got insulin in the blood and no sugar to pick up? And many people will know this feeling from the day after Christmas, where you wake up and there's no possible way you could be hungry, but you are. That's called an insulin hangover. And so that's what happens in this situation, but almost, within an hour or so, is that this insulin gets released because the system has learnt that sweetness equals, sugar. So the insulin needs to put the sugar into the cells or into the, process it and burn it. And if it doesn't find the sugar, what it will drive is hunger, because the insulin is in the blood. And so it's saying there's no sugar here. We need sugar in the system, so the insulin is used. And that's what the day after a huge binge or a huge celebration feels like, is I consumed like a week's worth of food yesterday. How could I be hungry today? And it's all this excess insulin because you needed so much yesterday that's in the blood, and it drives that hunger. So sometimes with alternative sweeteners, that's what can happen. It can drive this insulin up, and there's no sugar in the blood to pick up for that insulin. And therefore, you end up overeating real sugar because that's what your body is being pushed to go and crave and find and hunt.
So you don't have a hard, fast no, but it can be a tool to kind of step you out of the heavy sugar use and then
completely
get away from it, because it's not all natural. That's exactly what I'm hearing. Yeah. Okay. So on those same lines about natural food and, how our ancestors ate, I wanted to bring up the topic of protein powders and protein bars, because I do think you're somebody that promotes a very high in protein or protein first type diet. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
Okay. And I think a lot of us struggle with getting the right levels of protein.
Yep.
And so naturally, again, we go for the easy way out, right? And you can grab a protein bar or you can grab a protein powder, and it helps to get that level of protein in more readily. What do you think about that, though?
I think protein powders are a good thing to have adjacent to protein meals and food. The gut was designed to digest and process. And so I think when we do liquefied protein too often, where the gut's not getting what it needs. And also the other thing is, in a lot of those foods are all of the supporting nutrients to build the hormones, build the neurotransmitters that the amino acids in the protein are used for. And so if somebody's not getting enough protein in that I work with, it'll be have a protein shake alongside your steak. And instead of a shake that's 500 mils, which is however many ounces, sorry, Australian brain over here, it's instead of that, it's like maybe it's just a mug, maybe it's a cup. It's a cup of protein powder just to top up this, what you've put into the system. So I'm always going to be a food first kind of nutritionist, if you like. But supplements, and protein is effectively a supplement, are great tools to use, but they're tools that we use once the food has reached its limit.
So I think that's an important message. It's not a replacement, because a lot of people do the shakes as a replacement to a meal. And
Correct.
I'm clearly hearing you say do it with or supplement, but not as a replacement. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good rule of thumb. I want to take you into a topic that I don't know your opinion on, so this will be interesting, but I can probably guess it. So, weight loss drugs,
Hmm.
they're all the hype right now.
I know.
Everybody's talking about them, everybody's doing them. I mean, if you can't afford one, there's a way to get in the back door with another. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, so my thought is that most people are challenged by weight issues and health issues in generally because of their behavior and their choices, which is not necessarily me blaming anybody. The system is designed for us to be buying sugar, like, and the question that I always raise, which is, probably everybody's thought of it, is why is it cheaper for us to harvest things from our farms in Australia and America, send it to China, have it go through a factory which has got 10,000 employees, and come back to our supermarkets and be worth $1?
Yeah.
How is that possible versus the thing that came directly from the farm down the road straight to the supermarket being 10 or 20 or $30 a kilo? So I think I just want to acknowledge that first, because I don't think it's a lack of personal empowerment. I think the system is quite literally geared against us. And it's, from the psychology of supermarket design and impulse buying and all of that stuff. However, the reality is most of us as individuals don't have the power or the money to change the system.
Right.
So we do have to actually return to personal empowerment, right? And so for that reason, I think because of those challenges that society has presented us, is that that most people are in the health situation they're in because of the choices they've made, and the social group that they hang out with, and how they drink and how they eat and how the family eats and drinks that we came from. And so no matter which drug you use to try and change your health situation, and I spent years working in a cancer hospital to arrive at this same thought about cancer, is that when somebody is in a cancerous environment or in a overweight situation in their life, then they come to the hospital or they come and see me, and let's say we solve the problem, they just go back to the environment that caused cancer. They just go back to the life that caused them to be overweight and obese. And so what actually needs to happen is, that's a good first step, and possibly weight loss drugs are a good start. However, very rapidly, people go, oh, I don't need to worry about this anymore because the drugs solve the problem.
Yeah.
But because we haven't dealt with the underlying psychology and behavior change and mindset of how do I show up for myself as a healthy person that embodies healthy behaviors, it's highly likely you will either be dependent on this drug for life, which I know for a fact is going to reduce your muscle mass, is going to reduce the water and electrolyte balance in your body. It's going to cause gut issues. It's going to stunt possibly permanent weight loss in the future. You might develop weight loss resistance in a natural way, which might lead to needing bariatric surgery. And, there's a whole host of things. But if we're not dealing with the behavior change and the self-worth, and I deserve to be healthy and I can choose to be healthy and I have the resilience to do what's necessary, you're just going to end up in the same place.
Yeah.
And it's the same with cancer. If we don't go home and figure out what's the diet look like, what are the toxins under the sink, what is the makeup that you're wearing that's leaching into your skin, the cancer's going to come back. It's just going to come back, right? And it's the same with these weight loss drugs. Sure, people are getting amazing results, but they're never going to be able to sustain those results if they don't change the behavior that led them to be overweight in the first place.
I actually agree with you. The thing that I hear, though, from people that are on them over and over is that the one significant thing that they haven't been able to change in their own lives without the drugs is that constant chatter. The constant chatter that I don't know whether we call them cravings or the just food talk or whatever, that chatter that just is calling you and calling you all day long. And if you've had a weight issue at all, anybody listening, they know what I mean.
Yeah.
And these drugs shut that off.
I have heard that.
So you have these clients that you deal with that have that chatter. What do you tell them as an alternative? I mean, what's the magic without the drug?
Yeah. Well, and I've had this exact conversation about that mental chatter and how Ozempic has helped shut that off before. And my argument would be the same, is that the body and the mind are all the same. Your brain is a part of your body. Your feelings are just electrical impulses and hormones running along your nervous system. So the body and the mind to me are the same. And so if there's a deficiency or a problem in the way that we're thinking, it's a combination of learning how to think differently about yourself and want differently for yourself, but also it sounds like to me these drugs are putting a block on something.
Yeah.
And that might be some kind of brain function or neurological pathway that it's blocking really effectively, which is great. But as soon as we come off the drug, it's probably not just going to be the same thoughts. It's probably going to be a tsunami because we've essentially blocked a pipe that was currently coming through at a constant supply, and possibly, and this is what happens with fad dieting, and sort of why I like to be, the anti-diet, if you like, is because when we just say, okay, focus on being healthy and well, ignore all the bad stuff, willpower will get you through. And diets have never worked for really anybody for that reason, because we don't address what's really going on. And that could be a nutritional deficiency in the body. And particularly for middle-aged and older women, hormone balance is a huge factor in the way that their psychology pans out and the way that they can manage their thoughts and mental chatter. And it's really empowering, actually, to be like, oh, so it's not psychology, it's my nutrition, and if I just eat right, I feel so much better, and that might involve testing. And so I get the appeal, don't get me wrong. Any shortcut is appealing to me too. Like, I'm a human as well. It's like, how can I do this quicker, faster, more easily? But I think we're doing something in the short term which is going to cause a more detrimental effect long term, and a bigger challenge in 5 years than we have to deal with right now.
Yeah. I think all of what you've said kind of tie into something that I've heard you say before, and that's, people need to sort of level up their mindset and really go into an identity change when they want to go into a healthier lifestyle. What does that really mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Identity shift, I think, is at the core of wanting anything different for yourself. It could be money. It could be earning more money in your job, or starting a business, or getting healthy and well, or being in a body or in a life that embodies, somebody who you aspire to be. All of it is about identity. And I think the Western world has raised us all in a particular way that means we attach ourselves to things. And, I'm someone that does this, or watches that show, or goes to this pub, or attends this environment. And people in the health and wellness world do the same thing. Yeah. I'm a gym person, or that person's clearly a yoga person because they walk around, in their yoga gear all the time. And so we attach ourselves to these labels, and it's really hard to get out of them because our socioeconomic group that we spend time with also do the same thing. And actually, social determinants of health are really powerful, to the point that it's actually, the phrase is that your postcode or your zip code is more powerful than your genetic code. And that's because as tribe and pack animals, and we learn this at uni in social determinants of health, because we're pack animals, our number one priority is to not die, right? And one of the things as a pack animal is to stay belonging to a community and to a pack. And that as a human, being solo, or as a monkey in the wild, a solo monkey is at huge risk of death. Because as pack animals, we work together. And for that reason, we will quit the diet, we will abandon the no drinking, we will abandon everything if our social group, our friends and family, push us to say, why are you on this diet? Why aren't you drinking? And eventually we'll give in, because belonging to a social group is far more important than any other thing that we could do. And so that's why I think group programs, and this is shown in addiction research as well, is that attaching yourself to a community or a group that has slightly different values, that's interested in changing their identity, that's wanting to do the work, is good. Because when your normal group starts to judge you for your choices, you've got a group over here that says, hey, actually, we support what you're trying to do. We've got you back. And we don't feel lost and abandoned in the world by ourselves, because that risk of being alone in the world is literally the strongest driver we'll have to abandon any healthy routine whatsoever.
Yeah, and that community just helps validate your feelings, and you feel a little bit more connected and have a little bit more resistance to it. I've experienced that, so that makes sense to me. So I know you have a hard stop, so I have one last question for you.
Yes.
So in this space now, you've been doing this for several years. Mm-hmm. What still surprises you the most?
How unsupportive loved ones are. Which goes back to that exact conversation about community. And the reality is, it's most people feeling that somebody else's choices to get better reflects poorly on them and their lack of decision making for themselves. And the amount, so I've doing this 5 years now, sort of one-on-one and in groups, and the amount, so mainly work with women, the amount of husbands that literally ramp up their amount of sabotage. So they'll start bringing home wine every single night, donuts every single night, and like much more than they did before. And so that's something that actually, really shocks me and came to mind.
Me too.
Yeah. There's plenty of people that I work with that have got amazing partners, male and female partners that are like, whatever you need, babe, like tell me how I can support you.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people take other people's decisions really personally. And, I just think they need to join my program as well. Because we need to work on their mindset as well.
Well, and I think they probably have a feeling they may get left behind, right? I'm sure
Yes.
there's some of that. There's some concern that
Absolutely.
what happens to me.
Yeah.
Oh, man, this has been great. I always want to talk to you for 3 hours, but I do appreciate you coming and talking with me. Guys, check out Matty on How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. I think you'll love it. Of course, you can go to his webpage as well, and he has a bunch of programs, but check him out, and we'll put all the links out in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.